Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, September 22nd, 2016. This daily news and comment podcast is now available free everywhere, but we're distributing on YouTube. Makes it easy to grab it on your smartphone. Just enter Peter B. Collins in the search window and a picture of Chloe will pop up, and that takes you to my channel. Well, over at Newsweek magazine, which is a largely irrelevant publication these days, reporter Kurt Eichenwald did a deep dive into the finances of Donald Trump and his far-flung empire. And it's fascinating what he learned, despite the fact that there was zero cooperation from Trump, and we still have not seen tax returns, which could lead to disclosure of various complex partnerships that he is invested in. And Kurt Eichenwald dropped 5,000 words in this article. I've linked to it in the show file for the podcast, so you can click on it and read it for yourself. And it starts off on a real sour note for me, because Eichenwald offers no evidence but simply asserts that the Clinton Foundation is as clean as a whistle and everything that goes on there is just fine. There's no pay to play, nothing to look at, just keep moving. Now, I flatly disagree with that, but that's where he started. Then he turns his focus to the Trump Organization and writes, the Trump family rakes in untold millions of dollars from the Trump Organization every year. Much of that comes from deals with international financiers and developers, many of whom have been tied to controversial and even illegal activities. None of Trump's overseas contractual business relationships examined by Newsweek were revealed in his campaign's financial filings with the Federal Election Commission, nor was the amount paid to him by his foreign partners. And when you dig into it, and I'm just going to give you a couple of examples here, Donald Trump's investments, which are not based on building things the way he started out, it's based on licensing his famous or notorious name. And people are willing to pay cash money for that. This began apparently with a deal with the South Korean company Daewoo, and Daewoo had helped construct some of Trump's buildings in New York, and they approached him about building a Trump World condominium complex in Seoul, South Korea, and in 2 neighboring cities. And they struck a deal that pays Trump an annual fee of about $8 million a year. So Donald Trump has a vested interest in the security of South Korea because he has investments there. And if North Korea, for example, attacked the South and destroyed one of his hotels or in any way disrupted the South Korean economy, Donald Trump's self-interest would be directly affected. And so with Kim Jong-un becoming more and more provocative with nuclear tests and missile launches, some sort of an ego war between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, could involve interests that are not apparent to you, me, or any other well-informed American. Over in India, the conflicts between the interests of the Trump Organization and American foreign policy are even starker. Trump signed an agreement in 2011 with an Indian property developer called Rohan Lifescapes. They wanted to construct a 65-story building with the Trump name on it. And the deal has fallen into all kinds of problems, and there are lawsuits underway. But the scandal has come into a new phase as the parties are now turning to local government to try to enforce agreements that Trump made. And so his interests, according to the Newsweek article, extend to China, to Russia, to Turkey, and to many Middle Eastern nations. And the question that Eichenwald is really raising here is, if he becomes president, how do we deal with this? Now, in the past, presidents have put their assets into a blind trust, and a manager is allowed to control those finances until the president leaves office. In other cases, people have simply sold off their interest in an entity to clarify any potential conflict of interest. But Trump can't sell his company, not very easily, because it's where the whole family works. And even if Trump walks away and says, I won't talk to nobody about nothing about the Trump organization as long as I'm president of the United States, would you believe that? You don't think Donald Jr. or Ivanka is going to give him a call and say, hey, we got a little problem over in Dubai, Dad? You get the CIA to fix that for us? And so it appears that there is no easy way out for Trump to even create some arm's length distance between himself and the complex international business deals that have made him whatever money he has. I know it isn't the $10 billion he claims, but we'll be charitable here and assume that he is actually a billionaire. So I credit Newsweek for raising this story, and I hope it comes up in the debate next week. And I feel the same way about the Clinton Foundation. I mean, there's Bill giving a kind of farewell address to the Clinton Global Initiative this week, but he is presiding over a cesspool of influence peddling. And how Kurt Eichenwald can just write that off in his Newsweek story is bizarre to me. But I think both of these candidates need to provide accurate and reliable information about what they plan to do about these respective conflicts. And, of course, Trump's foundation is a sham, or at least it has been since he stopped contributing to it over 8 years ago. And that is fair game for Monday's debate as well. I just learned before airtime here that Yahoo has announced that I and 499,999,000 other individuals were the victims of hackers from a state-sponsored actor, and this occurred 2 years ago. Now, I still have a Yahoo email account. I don't use it much. It has over 100,000 unopened emails in it. And I have moved away from Yahoo. We used to use the Yahoo Pipes system to feed our podcast to iTunes. And Yahoo abruptly shut that down without notice to me or anybody else about a year and a half ago. And so while, this is just another alarming hack, and they tell us that they got our email addresses, passwords, birth dates, phone numbers, our security questions. And Yahoo encourages users to review their online accounts for suspicious activity and to watch out for suspicious emails. Now, this is a company that's being broken up. Melissa Mayer was brought in to rescue it, and she didn't. She'll get a $40 million parachute. Nobody's really said when Verizon will take over and when she will leave, but both are likely to occur in the near future. I have a profile in courage and a profile in cowardice revolving around the same member of the United States Senate for you today. His name is Chris Murphy. He is a Democrat from Connecticut. And on some issues, he's very strong. And on the issue of the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, I applaud the arguments that he has been making for months now. And on Wednesday, a bill that he was sponsoring did not pass. But 27 senators joined with Chris Murphy in calling for a reevaluation of U.S. support for Saudi Arabia, and the issue of the moment was an effort to delay or block a $1.15 billion weapons sale that has been authorized by the Obama administration. There's a total of $115 billion worth of arms that we have sold to Saudi Arabia during the Obama administration. And I'm glad Chris Murphy has stood up and challenged the status quo. He said there's been little to no debate in the U.S. Congress about this country's participation in civil war in Yemen that's greatly harming U.S. national security. The Saudis are not immune from criticism. Now, this breaks a lot of the rules in Washington right now. Nobody wants to stand up and debate war powers about Syria, Iraq, the Islamic State, Yemen, or anywhere else that we're operating, Libya, because they don't want a recorded vote like the one that has been used against Hillary Clinton and others from 2002, the authorization to invade Iraq. So it does take some courage And in this case, Chris Murphy has shown it. A couple of quotes from a speech he gave 6 months ago. There's growing evidence that our support for Saudi-led military campaigns in places like Yemen are prolonging humanitarian misery and aiding extremism. The Yemen war is now 18 months old. 10,000 people have been killed. And most of the weapons being used in Saudi Arabia were made in the United States or at least sold by American military companies. And Chris Murphy with Rand Paul and I believe Al Franken, he doesn't show much courage. He actually voted for this bill. But now to a moment of cowardice, because that same Chris Murphy, the Democratic senator from Connecticut, is one of 88 senators who signed an odious letter sent to President Obama. And while I don't know that the letter was dictated by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, it is an Israeli initiative, this letter. And AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which should be registered as a foreign lobby, but they skirt around that law, they got 87 senators plus Chris Murphy to sign this letter warning Obama not to back any international measures that would pressure Israel to withdraw from occupied territories. And they claim that this is only because it would be one-sided, and that Israel wants to have direct negotiations with the Palestinians, which they never get around to. So they're concerned that during the lame duck session, after the November election and before Obama is booted out of the White House on January 20th, that he will back a French resolution at the UN Security Council condemning Israel for its illegal settlement activity. Now, I'd love to see Barack Obama do that, but I don't know that he has it in him. And let's name names. Here are the people who were brave enough not to sign this letter. It's a short list. Patrick Leahy of Vermont, Bernie Sanders of Vermont, Tom Carper of Delaware, Dick Durbin of Illinois, and Rand Paul of Kentucky. Now, there are a handful of others. I don't have their names in front of me. But many people who are considered progressives voted for and signed this letter, like Elizabeth Warren, Al Franken, Amy Klobuchar, Ron Wyden of Oregon, Tammy Baldwin, the aforementioned Chris Murphy, Barbara Mikulski, Barbara Boxer, Cory Booker, Sherrod Brown, Richard Blumenthal, Ed Markey, Jack Reed. And so you get the picture. Courage is in very short supply and is very selectively applied in Washington these days. Now, at the UN, President Obama did meet with Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday, and for the photo op, it was all grins and, backslapping, we're good buddies. And in that public session, Obama said indirectly, we do have concerns around settlement activity. And we're told that in the private meeting, Obama was more pointed and raised profound U.S. concerns that settlement building is eroding prospects for peace. And we're told Netanyahu challenged that notion, and they kind of left it at that. They didn't talk about Iran, is reported. And I am linking to Joe Laria's great report published at Common Dreams yesterday on the UN General Assembly session in New York this week, and what he describes as Obama's curious UN farewell address. He says the Obama of 2008 reemerged, at least momentarily, at the UN with an uplifting address somewhat critical of American power and calling for an end to economic inequality at home and abroad. And Lauria writes, the speech revealed the president that Obama might have been. He didn't use the word exceptional once, as he has in his past UN speeches. He said, quote, power hasn't been unipolar for most of its history. The end of the Cold War has allowed many to forget this. America's adversaries and some of its allies believe all problems are caused by and can be solved by Washington. And too many in Washington believe that, too. I don't think that America can or should impose our system of government on other countries. As leaders of democratic governments make the case for democracy abroad, we better strive harder to set a better example at home. Now, this is one of those speeches that Obama gives that is maddening, because it shows that he has a very clear grasp of the problems that we face, of the shortcomings of our system, and of his own failures as president. And he even went so far as to several times criticize excessive capitalism. While open markets and capitalism have raised standards of living around the globe, he said, globalization combined with rapid progress in technology has also weakened the position of workers and their ability to secure a decent wage. In advanced economies like my own, unions have been undermined. And what did you do about it, Obama? And many manufacturing jobs have disappeared. Often those who benefit most from globalization have used their political power to further undermine the position of workers. So what the hell are you doing promoting the TPP? Read the entire dispatch from Joe Lauria, because toward the close he notes the surreal tone of Obama's speech when contrasted with the reality of Obama's 8 years in office. Meanwhile, the dispute over who's responsible for blowing up the UN refugee relief or humanitarian convoy near Aleppo this past Monday night just gets more and more confusing. The latest, and consider the source, is a report from RT, Russia Today, and it is badly translated into English, and I'll read it verbatim. On the evening of September 19, in that specific region, a drone belonging to the International Condition, I think they meant coalition, which had taken off from the Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, was flying at a height of 3,600 meters, traveling at around 200 kilometers per hour. This object was in the area around the town of al-Kubra, where the convoy was a few minutes before it caught fire. It left after about 30 minutes, referring to the drone. Now the Russians are pulling back from a direct indictment. Quote, only the owners know what exactly the drone was doing at this particular area at that exact time. And so they also rub it in a little bit about the U.S. attack last weekend on the air base where 80 Syrian soldiers were killed. And the question remains, who's responsible for the hit on the UN relief convoy? The Russians say all of the video footage demonstrates that the convoy caught fire, which strangely happened almost at exactly the same time as militants started a large-scale offensive on Aleppo. This type of drone can not only monitor the situation, but also guide ground weapons to their targets and inflict surgical airstrikes at objects located on the ground by itself. So they're attributing some remarkable attributes to American drones. We know Russia has its own drones, and so I remain unable to tell you who is exactly responsible for that attack on Monday night. And meanwhile, 4 medics who were responding to an earlier bombing raid were killed during what is called a double tap, the second hit on the same area. It took place shortly after they arrived at the scene of an airstrike in the rebel-held town of Khan Tuman on Tuesday. As the medics deployed, planes circled around and struck the area again. Now, once again, we don't have identification on whose planes those were. It certainly appears to be the Syrian military, but it's maddening in this Associated Press account that they're unable to describe who's responsible. Now, the U.S. once again says it believes that Russian or Syrian government jets were behind that attack. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like the indefatigable Faith Peoples, Andrew Harnack, Linda Lewis, Jason Ferguson. They're all monthly subscribers to this podcast, and some do even more. And I'd like to invite you to join them. This week, for whatever reason, several people have canceled their accounts, and I don't have any new signups to report in the last few days. I'm still dangling bonus books like Andrew Basovich's excellent history of America's war in the greater Middle East. I have one copy of that and one copy of Revolution's End about Patty Hearst and the SLA by Brad Schreiber. All you have to do is sign up for a new annual subscription for $50 at peterbcollins.com and give me a mailing address in the continental U.S. It's easy to do, so drop in at my website and take care of business when you can. I certainly appreciate it. And today, for my subscribers, I'm releasing a new in-depth interview that I found really fascinating. And a little context, it was about a month ago that I interviewed former Boston Globe reporter Larry Tye about his portrait of Bobby Kennedy in a new biographical book. And I was frustrated because while the book was good and taught me a lot that I didn't know about Bobby Kennedy, he really just skipped any serious coverage of the assassination of Bobby Kennedy in June of 1968, just after midnight on primary night at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. And in this really interesting interview that was suggested by listener Colleen McGuire, retired journalist Fernando Faura, a bilingual man who covered the Kennedy assassination and did his own investigation, says that he believes that Sirhan Sirhan, who was convicted of the assassination, was a Manchurian candidate, hypnotized to be the patsy in performing this assassination.
They had suspected from the beginning that Sirhan was a Manchurian candidate. Now, for your audience, in case they don't know what a Manchurian candidate is, a Manchurian candidate is a person that commits a crime under hypnosis. Mm-hmm. And the source is a very famous book and movie. The movie's been made twice.
Yes, it has.
In this country, called The Manchurian Candidate. All right, so they called him a Manchurian candidate, and I frankly wasn't buying into it. And I've always been very independent, so I just kept my investigation independent of theirs, and I kept moving on by myself. And so when I see this, and I'm reading this story about Sirhan claiming this, when you surfing the internet, you see other stories on a column on the right-hand side of other videos in which they tell you, if you like that video, maybe you'll like this one.
Right.
And in doing that, I saw a story about the Nixon attempts to scuttle the Paris peace talks. Mm-hmm. So I went there, and I started listening to that. And I knew about this attempt to scuttle the Paris peace talks. There have been a couple of books written about it. It's history. Mm-hmm. And they haven't paid much attention to it here. And in this country, it's history, but they're not paying attention to it.
And let me just add that this relates to a connection between a Nixon supporter, Anna Chennault, and alleged contacts that she made with the ambassador of South Vietnam, including an intercepted phone call shortly before the 1968 election, where she said, the boss says, hang on, we're going to win. And this is apparently evidence of an October surprise. And as you point out in the book, we've seen these from virtually every presidential candidate since. And this is, I think, a very significant connection that at least deserves, deeper investigation. I'm releasing the full interview with Fernando Faura to my subscribers today at peterbcollins.com, at TuneIn, at iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, wherever you find the Peter B. Collins podcast. And Mr. Faura also connects the assassination of Robert Kennedy to an October surprise. Richard Nixon was running in 1968, and one of his allies, a woman named Anna Chennault, reportedly contacted the South Vietnamese ambassador, and they were scheming behind the scenes in an effort to get Nixon elected by impacting the Johnson administration's policy in South Vietnam. Treason is what it would be called. And Faura also connects the Watergate break-in to concerns by Nixon and his administration that if, in fact, they had a role in the RFK assassination, that may have been discovered by Democrats, and that's why they sent the plumbers to break into the Watergate offices of the Democratic National Committee. It's all pretty fascinating stuff, and takes us back to the very dark era of the 1960s here in the United States. Well, last night I was watching cable news, and I was really uncomfortable because there's a protest underway in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the police have been deployed in riot gear with gas masks, and some tear gas canisters had been lobbed, and a few of the protesters had vandalized police vehicles and done a few other things. And in the exchange over the entire evening, one man was shot, reportedly by another protester, but we don't really know, and he is clinging to life in critical condition. But what is going on there that is really uncomfortable is that the chief of police and the mayor seem determined to keep video footage of the shooting of Keith Scott by a police officer. They want to keep that video private. They want to keep it out of the public eye. They have no plans to reveal it to the public. Now, the mayor says she's going to get a chance to review it. Her name is Jennifer Roberts. The police chief, Kerr Putney, it's Kerr is his first name. He said, well, look, it's consistent with what I have told you. He said the video does show that Keith Scott was holding a gun and not a book. I can tell you we did not find a book, he said, but it does not clearly show Scott pointing the gun at anyone. Now, let me point out that North Carolina is an open carry state. Keith Scott had the right to have a gun in his possession. Now, whether or not he pointed it at officers is still unknown to me. But we have seen the NRA, which is largely a white organization. I don't know too many black people who belong to the NRA. The NRA has led the charge to loosen gun laws. North Carolina is one of these states that allows open carry. But I believe that police officials treat whites who carry a weapon differently from blacks who carry a weapon. And maybe Keith Scott is an example of just that. And what's interesting is the police do appear to have some discretion about when to release this video. And there's a new law that takes effect that Pat McCrory, the governor, has signed. It takes effect on October 1st, which would essentially make a video like this impossible to release legally. So North Carolina there are a lot of great people there. I don't want to denigrate the entire state, and I'm not going to call you a basket of deplorables. But the government is run by right-wing Republicans who are determined to fix elections and to make North Carolina a great place for white people. At least that's my opinion from a few thousand miles away. So this is indefensible, in my opinion. If they want to avoid, and the governor's called the National Guard to the streets when the Charlotte police really appeared to have it under pretty firm grip last night. And so I find this really frustrating because the police chief there is saying, trust me, I know what's in the video, and I'll tell you what's in there, but I'm not going to let you see it with your own eyes. And here's his carefully crafted statement. When taking in the totality of all the other evidence, it supports what we've heard and the version of the truth that we gave about the circumstances that happened that led to the death of Mr. Scott. Yeah, right. And in Tulsa, we continue to grapple with some of the same issues. In the death of Terrence Crutcher, he was the guy who called the cops because his car stalled out. And one of the most damaging bits of evidence that has surfaced is the female police officer who shot him said, well, he was moving toward his vehicle and about to reach into the driver's side window. Only the driver's side window was rolled up. And after she shot him, his blood was all over that window, which proves that it was not down prior to the taser and bullet that were directed at Terrence Crutcher. And one of the other big questions that arises when we see these videos is how on earth can the cops shoot somebody and then stand around and not make any effort to check their vital signs, to see if they're still alive, to see if first aid could help them? They don't even go near these victims. And I find this very disturbing, and in the media today, there are a bunch of people trotting out excuses about, well, you know, the police can't be sure. Well, after you shoot somebody and they're lying lifeless on the ground, it's, in my view, pretty safe to approach them. John Boehner, the former Republican Speaker of the House, partial to cigarettes, Merlot, and free trade, is cashing in big time on 2 of those 3 items. He just recently signed on for $400,000 a year as a board member of Reynolds American, the tobacco company that makes Camel and Newport cigarettes. He also has joined a juice law firm, Squire Patton Boggs, where he's going to be working for the Republic of China, AT&T, Amazon.com, Goldman Sachs, Royal Dutch Shell, and a bunch of hedge fund operators. Now, I mentioned he also likes Merlot, so I'm waiting for the Wine Institute here in San Francisco to announce that they have hired John Boehner, too. The Green Party, with activist Kevin Zeese, a guy who we talk to occasionally and who was considered a vice presidential nominee by Jill Stein. Kevin Zeese is recruiting Green Party members who want to go to Hofstra University on Monday, where the first presidential debate is being held, and to which Jill Stein is explicitly not invited. And he is asking people to sign up in 2 groups. Are you willing to be arrested? You want to avoid arrest. And he's not clear exactly what they're going to do, but the description is that they may try to escort Jill Stein into the presidential debates and attempt to get her on stage. We'll see how that goes. New polling shows that the Democrats hope to regain control of the Senate. That hope is declining. In races in Ohio and Florida, the polls show that people like Rob Portman and Marco Rubio are likely to win re-election, and John McCain in Arizona and Charles Grassley in Iowa now have double-digit leads in the polling for their campaigns. Now, this marks a dramatic reversal for Senate Democrats, who've gone from hoping that Trump would drag down the prospects of the Republicans who are up for re-election this year and open the door for Democrats. But the reverse now appears to be true, that Hillary Clinton's unpopularity is dragging down the prospects of Democrats running for the Senate this year. And finally today, on a slightly lighter note, Hillary Clinton sat for one of those interviews between 2 ferns with Zach Galifianakis, or however you say his name, and it's clear that her campaign handlers put her there in a desperate effort to reach millennials. And Hillary was pretty game. Certainly, you know, this is a weird setting, and you have to be able to roll with the punches, and Zach does deliver a few punches. But I've linked to the YouTube link so that you can watch this. It's about 5-6 minutes long, and I laughed out loud a couple of times. And the funniest line is at the very end, where Galifianakis asks Hillary Clinton if he can stay in touch with her now that they've met. And he said, so, do you prefer telephone or email? Hillary, well, I'll have to watch it again. I think she just laughed. Thanks for joining me today for my news and comment. This free podcast, now available on YouTube. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling